Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into two ideas right at the heart of the Latter-day Saint faith that seem to totally contradict each other. We're talking about an eternal, divine Christ and a church led by very mortal and sometimes mistaken prophets. Let's get into how they believe both of these can be true at the exact same time.
This question right here gets to the core of it, doesn't it? How can a being be both without a beginning and yet have one? For Latter-day Saints, really understanding Jesus Christ means you have to solve this very puzzle. So how in the world do they do it? Well, the conflict really kicks off with two of Jesus's official titles. On one hand, he's called Jehovah, the eternal, uncreated God. But then he's also called the firstborn Son of the Father, which, well, that sounds like he had a starting point. So which one is it? Is he God or is he a son?
And here's that tension, laid out plain and simple. On one side, you've got Jehovah, the eternal creator who has no beginning or end. And on the other, the firstborn Son, the very first spirit child of God the Father, which implies a very definite starting point. I mean, these two ideas seem completely impossible to reconcile.
So, how do you solve a puzzle like this? Well, within Latter-day Saint theology, the answer isn't to pick one over the other. No, the key that unlocks this whole paradox is a really foundational concept they call intelligence.
Okay, so to really get how Jesus can be both eternal and have a beginning, we first have to wrap our heads around this idea of an uncreated core of being. So what is this intelligence? Think of it as the absolute fundamental essence of a person, like a spark of light or truth that was never actually created. In this theology, it has simply always existed, just like God has always existed. It's the raw, unmade stuff of who you are.
And this isn't just some philosophical idea. They ground this right in their scripture. This verse from the Doctrine and Covenants says it plainly. This intelligence was never created, and it's co-eternal with God. And what's really fascinating is that they believe this applies not just to Christ, but to all of us.
You know, the flame and lamp analogy really helps make this a lot clearer. Imagine the eternal, uncreated intelligence is the flame. It's always existed, always been burning. Then God the Father creates a lamp, which is a spirit body, to house that flame. So the flame is eternal, but the lamp, the vessel, has a definite beginning. And this quote from a past church president, Joseph F. Smith, makes that exact same distinction. He explains that, yeah, the spirit body of Jesus had a beginning as the firstborn, but his core intelligence, that's eternal. It was never created.
Okay, so now that we have this framework, this idea of an eternal intelligence inside a created spirit body, we can finally map out the journey from firstborn Son to Jehovah and see how that initial paradox gets resolved. So here's how the timeline works. First, for all eternity, this intelligence exists. Then, at a specific point in time, that intelligence is given a spirit body, becoming the firstborn Son. And finally, as the firstborn, he is appointed by the Father to take on the role and title of Jehovah, the Creator. So in this view, he's eternal in his essence, but has a beginning in his role as the Son. So, just like that, the first puzzle is solved. But here's the thing. This understanding comes to us through modern prophets. And that raises a second, and for a lot of people, a much, much tougher question. Which brings us to our second big paradox. How can you trust the teachings from prophets who, by the church's own admission, have made pretty big mistakes? And this question is a sharp one. If these doctrines are revealed through prophets, why should anyone trust them when those same leaders have made serious errors? Like, for example, the past restriction on priesthood for Black members. It's a really powerful challenge to the whole system. The first part of the answer is a pretty direct clarification. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not teach that its prophets are infallible or perfect. In fact, it teaches the exact opposite. And this isn't some kind of secret they try to hide. Modern leaders, like Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf, have been very open about it. He states, frankly, that leaders are human, they've made mistakes, and they've sometimes done things that were out of line with God's will. So the argument then tries to reframe the problem. Instead of prophetic fallibility being this modern crisis, it's presented as a consistent pattern that you can find all the way through the scriptures. And I mean, the Bible is just full of examples. You've got Moses, who disobeyed a direct command from God. Jonah literally ran away from his mission. And the Apostle Peter, the rock of the early church. He not only denied Christ, but was later called out by Paul for being a hypocrite. The pattern is pretty clear. God has a long history of working through imperfect people. So, the core argument here is that human error in prophets isn't a bug in the system that breaks everything. Instead, it's presented as a consistent feature. It's just how God has always chosen to work with humanity. So, where does all this leave believers today? Well, it all comes down to this idea of having faith in a living church, one that's led by imperfect, but they believe still divinely guided messengers.
The key idea here, the really crucial point, is that the system is designed to course correct. So when the priesthood restriction was lifted back in 1978, it wasn't seen as proof that prophets are untrustworthy. Instead, it's presented as evidence that God is still speaking, still revealing his will, and can steer the church back on course. This belief in continuing revelation is what allows for that growth and change.
And ultimately, this reframes the whole discussion, leaving us with one last question to think about. Is faith a belief in perfect people, or is it faith in a God who knows they aren't perfect and works through them anyway?